Welcome back to Wake Up with Nubian Tigers Talk, a podcast brought to you by a group of Black Princetonians where we talk about issues impacting our Black and Brown communities. My name is Michelle Jacobs, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Ray Smalls. You know, we haven't had a chance yet to talk about the Supreme Court's affirmative action decision.
Well, that's because I've been seeing my therapist for the last couple of months. Because I've been so depressed by this conservative court, that it does take some time to try to get over some of their decisions.
It does. But the affirmative action decision should not have been a surprise to anyone who follows the subject.
No.
And today we're going to bring on someone who's been on the show before and whom we just love sitting down and talking with to look at some of these issues about the decision and the impact it may have on our HBCU environments. So today we're bringing back Kenneth B. Nunn, who is a professor emeritus now at the University of Florida Levin College of Law. Before he retired, Ken taught criminal law, criminal procedure, African American history in the law, and seminars on police brutality, race and crime, and cultural studies. Nunn received his AB degree from Stanford University and the JD degree from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. Before joining the University of Florida faculty, Professor Nunn was a public defender in San Francisco and at the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C. We're so happy to welcome you back to the show, Ken.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me back. It's a distinct pleasure to speak to you too, as always.
Absolutely.
And so many things have happened since the last time you were here that it's just, we could talk about so many things, but we wanted today to focus on two issues. So let me just jump in and ask you, this year in a decision that was not totally unexpected, the Supreme Court ended affirmative action in college admissions. Now, you taught in a predominantly white institution for most of your career, along with me and others. What effect do you think the decision will have on the actual admissions for people of color?
Well, I think it will have an impact for sure. And first, let me just say that although I'm disappointed in the demise of affirmative action, we have to realize that it was never really a significant fix for racial injustice in America in the first place. It was a real minor program that was half-heartedly implemented around the country. And, that's why there were always actions that were being taken by the Department of Education. There was the Ayers lawsuit, where many of the Southern schools, including the University of Florida, were sued over their affirmative action policies. This has been going on for years, where we see that majority white institutions, PWIs, have not really put the kind of energy and resources into recruiting and retaining African American students and other students of color that they should have. But they did bring some in, and there were a lot of people who got opportunity and jobs, and positions in government and courts, et cetera, as a consequence of those limited policies that were in place, and I'm sorry to see them go. But having said that, we have to understand that, we have a burden to climb in the first instance anyway, whether the Harvard case was decided or not.
Yeah, I mean, people don't really realize, who aren't connected to the issue, how long affirmative action has been under attack. But when I was in law school, right? Mm-hmm. I entered law school in 1979. Mm-hmm. There was already a lawsuit to get rid of affirmative action in our state.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure your timing in law school, but it's close to mine. I mean, that was Bakke. I mean, I remember. Mm-hmm. I remember. Here's a story. I was a senior at Stanford University, and I went to dinner at some Japanese restaurant in Palo Alto. And one of my friends I was with at the time starts whispering, "That's Bakke over there." Oh. So we turned, and there he was, out with his family, having some said we should mess with them. I said, nah, we're not gonna do that. Let them eat in peace. But it had been going on for a long time. That's basically right.
Right. Yeah, it's been long coming.
Mm.
So for those schools that are still interested or say they're still interested in having a diverse student body, are there ways that they can achieve their goals without running afoul of the new Supreme Court?
Mm.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, there is, because the Supreme Court voted to get rid of affirmative action, and the votes were made by all of the conservatives. It was a 5-4 decision. But my thought is that those justices did not want to be targeted as being racist when they made that decision. So what they had to do was find a way that universities could use race, but they couldn't use it in the easy, effective way that you could use it under current affirmative action policies. Now, of course, those current affirmative action policies aren't as good as they were back in the day, when you had the ability to look directly at a person's racial background and say that, well, we'll do what Clinton said he wanted to do when he wanted to fight crime. He didn't say, let's get some kind of mix, looking holistically at everyone to determine who should be a police officer and put them on the street. He said, I have a quota. I want 1,000 police officers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to put 1,000 police officers on the street. There was a quota. And, that got a bad name when it was applied to university admissions. But usually when we want to be effective, that's what you do. You have a target, you have a quota, and you say, these are the people that we want to bring in. So, yeah, it's not as effective as it could have been otherwise. But, they didn't want to just say, oh, you can't use race at all. So there's language in there where they say that you can use race, a person can use race, they can write about how their racial background or their racial experiences have prepared them to get education. So you can still write your essay talking about how race makes a difference. So one thing you can do is you can, kind of revamp your admissions processes so that you're focusing on people's stories and who they are and how they got to be where they are. So there's that. The other low-hanging fruit, of course, is let's get rid of these standardized tests, which don't measure anything. We've known that those things were race normed to advantage white people in the very beginning. Here's another story. When I was a law student, I would be in the Balsa office, and there was this white guy, a little skinny white guy, would come up from down the street in Berkeley, and he worked for an organization called Fair Test, and he would give us the questions, and he would work, he's always working with the bar and the national, there's some national organization out in Michigan and that does these LSAT tests. Not the LSAT, those are the bar tests, but he'd also do it with the
SATs.
New Jersey. Somebody in New Jersey does this. So this guy would come into our Balsa office, and he'd want to give us tests that were potential questions that would be used in the LSAT and bar exams and things of that nature. And he'd want to see how we saw it. So what happens is Educational Testing Services, that's the outfit out in New Jersey, they would give these preliminary tests to a group of people that they selected. They say, okay, we run these through. And sometimes they put them in the real exam, but they tell the students they don't count. So you go through, do those, and then they come back and look at the results. So if the results were such that there was a disproportionate number of women who did not score well on the test, or men who didn't score well on the test, or rich people who didn't score well on that question, then they would norm it, say that's not a good question. We need to take that one out because we're not seeing the expected result. But they wouldn't do that if Black students wouldn't do well on the test. So this is a fundamental issue that gets missed all the time. We talk about these standardized tests. So I don't want to get into that to any real detail, but the bottom line is get rid of the tests. Let's look at some other factors to determine whether people qualify. That will help. We can use outreach, right? The whole pipeline program thing to get people out. Here's another personal story. I went to Stanford University because I wanted to play football for their team. I didn't get a scholarship offer, but they were so bad, I thought I could walk on to the team. Okay. I did not know Stanford was an elite institution.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was a, sort of gravy that came on top of the mashed potatoes that I wasn't even expecting. And if I'd known that, I probably wouldn't have gone there anyway, because
Fascinating.
that wasn't my cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is that there are lots of kids like that are out there who have no idea what college is, or what a good college is, or what college could do for you in your life. And that could be fixed. There are a lot of talent out there that's being missed. There's a movement to implement what's called holistic review in the admissions process. And so you could start looking at a person, for example, let's say someone who went to an underprivileged, what we used to call an underprivileged neighborhood, right? Economically challenged might be a way to put it, but an underprivileged neighborhood where people don't have the same academic resources that they may have in some suburban school districts. People are not able to get coaches and tutors and things of that nature. And you make your admissions decisions in light of that. It's the holistic factor that you're looking at the person, what they have to overcome, and not simply looking at the final score. So you want to implement something like that. Eliminate legacy admissions. So that's really the real affirmative action that is going on right now. And a number of those seats are, most of those seats really, unless we're talking about athletes, most of those seats are taken by people not of color.
Isn't that getting challenged now, Nick?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, that's
okay.
correct. Yeah. And then here's, part of the Florida situation. Florida, we've been without affirmative action for 20 years. Because when Jeb Bush was the governor, he had a plan called One Florida. There was a crazy black guy out of California by the name of Ward Connolly.
Yes, Ward Connolly.
You remember him?
Yes. Now I do that you say the name.
He was going around the country and he was trying to get people to get rid of affirmative action. And this was in the early 90s.
Right.
So he got Texas to get rid of their affirmative action program. And then he came to Florida. And in Florida, Jeb Bush said, oh, well, we'll just have this One Florida program where you can have affirmative action. So everybody thought that the numbers would drop precipitously in the PWIs in the state, and they did drop, okay? But at the law school, after we got rid of affirmative action, we actually wound up with some of the largest African-American classes in the entering law school class that we ever had.
Yes, it was like 13%.
Because they implemented that program called the MPLE, where they gave money to these students and offered them, said, we will pay you to come to the state of Florida and take go to the law school of your choice. And we had, like, at one point, I think there were 50 African-American students in the class.
I think it was 13%. Yeah.
All you got to do is put the resources there and they will come. So those are all the things that I think. Oh, the other thing that Texas did that I didn't mention is that so-called top 10% plan.
Yes.
And, you can certainly say, well, we're not going to look at these factors. Let me say one thing, because this is what I've noticed most about my experience. This may segue into something else you want to ask me, but I've noticed most about my experience being at Howard University Law School as a visitor after 30 years at the University of Florida and I guess 2 years at Florida A&M Law School, is that these are some of the best students I have taught in my 32 years in legal education. taught on 4 continents. I've taught at law schools across the country. These are some of the best students I have had, period, with a T.
Why is that?
Because they are prepared. They, and I have to say, I qualify that because I haven't administered a test yet. So let me qualify that. But what I'm talking about is in the classroom. They are more prepared than my students would be at the University of Florida. I am not pulling their teeth to get them to be prepared, to do the reading, to speak up, to be clear, to have good analysis. I mean, all of that is something that they're doing. I commend the Howard faculty because it's obviously clear that they have well-trained those students. I've got some upper level students in the classes that I'm teaching, and they are, I think they're able to compete with anybody, anywhere, anytime. So I'm looking at that and I'm saying to myself, why are these students not at Harvard? Why are these students not at Yale? Why are these students not, you pick the school, not at where, you pick the school. And the thought came to me, of course, that some of them aren't there because they made a conscious decision to come to Howard because they wanted to be in a supportive environment and they wanted to learn from some of the best African-American legal minds in the business. And that's why they're there. So that covers, a good portion of them. But then there are some students there that are at Howard, like many students across this country who go to law school, med school, engineering school, whatever. They're looking at rankings and they're saying, I'm going to go to the best school I can get in. And Howard was the best school they could get in. Some of these other schools, they weren't able to get in. So the question is, what's wrong with the selection process that we are using to determine who gets this social benefit of being trained as a lawyer and who does not? I mean, it's clearly a choice that's being made. And what the results of my experience at Howard suggests to me is that we're not looking at the right thing. Okay, as a country across the board, as a nation, we're not looking at the right thing because there's a whole lot of students who, based on their performance, should be at the top schools in the country. And then that comes to mind. It's like, I've been thinking about this for all of my career. When I was at UF, for most of those years, I'm like, I'm writing these exams, but I'm not real certain that the people who perform well on the exam are necessarily the people I would want to hire to represent me in a law.
Exactly.
So part of that is because we have this privileging of like linear thinking and writing. And we think that because you do well in that context, you're going to do well in other contexts. And there isn't any reason to believe why that's true. For example, you don't care how well your surgeon did on a written exam. What you care about is that person's motor skill. That's what you care about because, and that's why when you get surgery, you don't care whether it's Johns Hopkins or whether it's some community hospital somewhere. You go where the person who has skill is. If that person is a skilled person and they're at the community hospital, that's where you want to go.
Right. You don't want someone leaving a scalpel in your liver.
Exactly. And it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing with lawyering, is that there's a whole lot of people who are nerdy and they're good at certain types of tasks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at legal analysis. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at representing a client or they're good at advocacy or they're good at, all the other things, all the other components that make up being a good lawyer. Okay. And so the same thing is we have this thing where we talk about, we want credentials and we need to see people who are, quote, qualified to do the position, but then our qualifications are skewed so that we're not necessarily getting the best people. So that's something that really, I don't know if it troubles me or if it interests me, but I think that there has to be more attention paid to that factor, not just in law school, but across American life. We get to the point where we think that this person, because they have this score on some, standardized test of some sort,
Right.
is more intelligent. This person's a Mensa. Yeah, well, you might be a Mensa, but you ran your business into the ground. So what does that tell you?
Yeah. Your experience mirrors the experience I had when my 3 years at Howard, when my students were just absolutely brilliant. And at one point I looked at a couple of their files in terms of like their scores and their GPA, and it actually turned out that they were stronger than many of my UF students. And they, as you say, they didn't have to be cajoled into learning. They were there because they wanted to learn, and they knew they had to get a handle on those skills in order to be able to use them effectively as lawyers for whatever their client population was.
That's a good point, because quiet as it's kept, right? You go to these places like Harvard and Princeton and, University of Pennsylvania and whatnot, and you start pulling out those, there's probably some people somewhere who are thinking that now that we got rid of affirmative action, we're going to get rid of these Black people who are going to these schools. But they don't know that a lot of those people who are in those schools have credentials, LSAT and SAT scores just as high as everybody else. They're going to be shocked when they, start to do that. So I think there's going to be some diminishment of the numbers that we see in these predominantly white institutions, but not as much as people probably are expecting.
So in your brief time at Howard, Ken, and I don't know how many other interactions you've had with other HBCUs in your career, but do you think they have the capacity to absorb the students that would have gone to predominantly white institutions under affirmative action?
Yeah.
Well, Ray, actually, I don't. I have experience in very short time, a few, less than a semester at Howard, and I was about a year and a half at FAMU as an administrator at their law school. I've been in and around and with, I've got many family who've gone to HBCUs and been on many campuses and have worked in academic settings with faculty from many HBCUs. So I have some understanding of what they have. What the biggest problem HBCUs have is they are underfunded. They do not have the resources, and I know that many of these HBCUs, including Howard and Morehouse and Spelman, are expecting to double the student population that they had after the Supreme Court decision, and they don't have the resources to be able to take care of that. Now talking about resources, I don't know if you all saw the letter that the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Education wrote to governors in the South. Various governors, 11 governors got these letters, basically talking about the historic underfunding that states have provided to the HBCUs in their state.
Yes.
I think it was $900 million at the state of Florida for FAMU, and I think FAMU is the only state HBCU that we have in Florida. So for that was a good amount of money, right? And then, there was one state, I think Mississippi, was $1 billion. I mean, there's a lot of money. It was $13 billion together. So there are billions upon, and that was just money that had been sent to the states that was federal dollars that hadn't been allocated properly. And rather than hold those states responsible, which they should have done, they're basically saying, well, just ask for it again and we'll give it to you. And then the states are going to hem and haw about asking for it, like they did for, the Medicare and Medicaid funding. And
Medicaid,
that was available under, during the pandemic. They didn't want to take it. So, so we'll see. But the point is that these institutions have been historically underfunded. And, where are they going to put the bodies? Where they, if you go to Howard, Howard is maxed out in terms of dorm space right now.
Right.
And that's true with a lot of HBCUs. So, it's going to be difficult. There has to be, that's an area that we can get some advocacy in and work on, and to get, our elected officials and, so-called civil rights leaders to fall into, which is we need to find money to fund these things. Now, the other thing is I had a multi-million-dollar education, as you two did as well.
Right.
But the benefit, the financial benefit of that for a person like us is not the same as it is for our non-African American colleagues across the board. Now, there's certainly, people who, are doing quite well, who have a darker tone of skin. And there are probably a whole lot of people, particularly those who make the choices, as Michelle and I did, to go into, some kind of public interest oriented area of practice, who, are not making as much regardless of skin tone. But the point is that the alumni base of these HBCUs can't do for the schools what the alumni base for PY, like the University of Florida, and certainly not like Harvard, can do for their school. So it can't be one of those things where the education is something that we're dependent upon the school itself or upon its alumni to do. It has to be a governmental concern. It has to be something where we think, and that's one of the problems I have with the decision, right? Is the Harvard decision, Harvard North Carolina decision, is that this, I won't call it by the acronyms of the student group, that alleged student group that sued, because it's an oxymoron. But nonetheless, the point is that, this is a government, not a government, it's a social benefit, something that African people understood after, the Civil War and during Reconstruction. It is a social benefit for the nation to produce educated people. We're seeing the consequences of having an uneducated population right now, in terms of the crazy stuff that's happening with the Republican Party.
Yes.
And highly unintellectual, easily manipulated and used, and believing in conspiracy theories that have absolutely no sense. Why? Because it's an anti-intellectual movement.
Yep.
So the issue is that the government wants to continue to govern. They need to have educated people across the board to be able to do that. And with how much good talent is being continuing to sit on the sidelines because people in African American communities across this country are not getting an education. As the commercial says, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. It's getting wasted.
Yeah. So here's the thing that I worry about. You said that in order for government to function, it needs an educated base. But I'm thinking that these conservatives or white nationalists or whatever you want to call them don't want an educated base.
There you go.
It's easy for them to govern without it.
Right.
But
right.
And
that's right.
Yeah. And I think the problem that I see potentially happening for the HBCUs is what has happened for the Black farmers. When government finally decided to remediate the denial of assistance to the Black farmers that the white farmers would get, you got this white group that came up and objected to that and halted the ability of the Black farmers to get their money. And so I'm thinking, well, if resources are shifted to HBCUs, won't they then also?
There'll be a backlash.
Become under attack.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the idea is to have no one get educated. Right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what's going to happen. I expect that to happen. But let me just say one thing in terms of Ray's point, and that is that, yes, they want, and I guess your point too, Michelle, is that they want an uneducated populists. And the reason why what I said is government requires that. What I meant to say, a particular type of government requires that. That is democracy.
Mm.
If you don't have government by and for the people, then you can be dumb as a rock, because somebody else is going to tell you what you can and what you cannot do. And that's the kind of government that these white supremacists want. You know, they want a government where it's authoritarian, and they have, but they don't have the best people. They have people like Donald Trump. And it bothers me when we're sitting around talking about how African-American people have to show the credentials that they have. That Ketanji Brown Jackson has to be so erudite and so intelligent and so gifted and so, above, everyone else to get that position. And then some no account, bozo. I shouldn't use that phrase. That's kind of derogatory, but I couldn't think of
it's derogatory to clowns.
I was just thinking of Clarence Thomas. You didn't mean him, did you?
Well, yeah, I guess we could say the same thing about him too.
Yeah.
My point was that the president himself, by every book, every article that has been written about people's experience in the Trump White House, it's absolutely clear that he was unfit.
Yes.
To be president.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so what? Nobody cares.
Nope.
So then you're going to come to me, or you're going to come to my children, or you're going to come to children in my community and say, well, but you're not qualified.
Yeah. All you got to do is put a picture up of him.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Bo Bird, or Jim Jordan, or
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Pick from the list. Yeah. So Ken, where do we go from here? What can folks do to help shore up the HBCUs, and also what kind of I know this is not fair because we didn't put this in our list of questions, but what kind of strategizing should we do to help our communities go forward?
Well, I think that the first thing that we need to do is we have to fight on all fronts. And one of those fronts is we have to continue to fight to try and make sure that in my perspective on it is, as a Florida citizen, I pay taxes in the state of Florida. I expect that institutions in the state of Florida should benefit my community as well as everyone else. And that is a matter of principle. And if it isn't actualized, then it's something that I feel like I need to bring up, and I need to talk about, and I need to fight over, and I need to, approach my elected officials and organize around. So I think that that's first one issue, is that all these institutions, most of which are state institutions, there are some private ones, but most of these institutions we're talking about are state-run institutions, state-funded institutions. Those institutions should provide opportunity for everyone without regard to race. At least that's what the Supreme Court says. So we need to make sure that they do that, hold their feet to the fire. The second thing that we need to do, of course, is we always have to worry about educating ourselves, right? Education is about socialization so that a community has continuity. And particularly as African descended people in this world, we have an obligation to make sure that each one beneath us gets the correct information. Now, I knew the whole time I went to high school, the whole time, the whole time I had primary and secondary education, I knew I wasn't getting the truth there. All right? We had clubs. We had Black History Club, we had groups that were established for us to do that. And in that era that I was coming through, which is after the Black Power era, then all of a sudden you started seeing Black bookstores pop up.
Right.
And sort of an ecosystem of Black publishing and Black authors and Black themed books, and many of which were about history and political science and the like. And you could go and you could educate yourself. You could get some knowledge. And so we have to understand that that's our obligation for ourselves and for, our communities on our own. And if we are not able to teach it in our schools because we have some crazy, people who are running the school or running the state education system, then we need to figure out a way to make sure that that lesson continues to get taught in our basements and in our churches and everywhere else that we can teach it. So that's, kind of the second part of the strategy. The third part is, of course, we got to support our HBCUs. And that part of that is, even though we don't have the kind of money that, Mackenzie Bezos has, right? Can't go give $20 million to Morehouse
or Melinda Gates,
right?
Or Gates or anybody. We don't have that kind of money, right? But the reason why Barack Obama won the presidency was not because of the Gateses and the Bezoses and whatever else, the other billionaires of the world. He won it because he was very effective at getting small money donations. And it was the small money donors that gave him the war chest that he was able to use in his run for the presidency. And so that means, what's a small money donor? That, well, you got $20, you got, $100. The main problem with this is not just HBCUs, it's across the educational spectrum. You don't get your alumni regularly giving small money donations. If everybody gives, if the whole alumni base gives $100 a year, you're bringing in millions more than you're bringing in now, because most schools, they're lucky, public schools, they're lucky if they can get 10% of their alumni base.
Right.
So it's really broadening that, getting that in. So all of us, we should do that. I support my alma mater, which has more money than they need. I support my wife's alma maters, I should say, which are HBCUs. All right. And I support FAMU, and I support other HBCUs that I have nothing to do with, because I think it's important. And so I think that those are the types of things that we can certainly do now, and continue to fight.
Michelle, if I could just interject, just on that point about our community trying to be more consistent or contribute more toward those kinds of institutions, right? COVID has put a real big damper on that, Ken, because a lot of folks lost jobs. I know people that are professional people, went to great schools or what have you, but their jobs were phased out or were, just discontinued because people were trying to bring their numbers down for COVID. So the market and it's just they're still trying to recover just from that. So that's a challenge right now, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. I mean, this is how I look at it, Ray. Things have never, my life has never been a crystal stair, right? Things have never been perfect for us as a people. We've always had challenges, certainly economic challenges. And that's how I look at this whole thing. I like to look at it with the long view history. And in the long view of history, we're doing better now than we ever were. It's bad. It could, certainly be better. We haven't gotten to the promised land yet, but there's been a lot of travail along the way, and we were able to overcome that. People were sending in their small dollar donations to Mary McLeod Bethune, to get Bethune-Cookman Institute off the ground. And, Booker T, was it Booker T? No, he went to Hampton, but, it was Tuskegee. You're seeing these small little envelopes coming with 25 cents in it and whatnot, contribute to the cause. And so we'll just have to do what we do. We'll make a way out of no way. But yes, it's a tough time. No doubt.
And people forget, I think, or maybe the younger generations that didn't go through the 50s, 60s, and 70s don't know about the fundraising, micro fundraising that we used to do, like rent
Mhm.
parties,
Rent parties, right?
right? Somebody didn't have their rent money, you threw a house party
Yeah.
and everybody bought $5, $10, whatever, until you raised enough money to have that person stay secure in their home, right? So these are, it won't raise $1 million, but it could raise thousands of dollars. The other thing too is I've had to explain recently to people freedom schools, right? If you can't get what you need in school, run an underground, run a Saturday program.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
So, and of course, Charles Ogletree did the same when he was up at Harvard.
Harvard.
I'm going to have a Saturday school and teach these kids what they need to get that they're not getting in the curriculum, and bring in people. And everybody can't bring in, top name people, to fly in and do the Saturday school and fly out. But, you certainly can have, you can have some of the students who are in the university themselves go down to the church rec room or over a basketball court or whatever, and hold, short little lessons with people, tell them about information that they need to have. And even whether it's just straight up information, education about accomplishments of African-American people or the accomplishments of African people throughout history. It's simply like the simple thing, like this is what a top ranked school is in your discipline. This is the kind of place where you need to go. I mean, there's so much information that's kept close by the powers that be, and they don't want you to know about what this is. And you go there, you're like, wow, y'all had all this? And they'll ask you, they'll say, well, how'd you find out about it?
Right.
How did you learn about this gathering, sir? So we need to spread that information. We need to be a little bit better about informing one another and working collectively.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother podcast about erasing Black history, isn't it, Michelle?
Yes, definitely is. But Ken's absolutely right. And working collectively sometimes means you got to get off your devices, or you use your device to start the project. But in the final analysis, you got to get with some other Black folks and do what is necessary in order for us to keep moving forward against the wishes of these white supremacists who are trying to push us back to 1890.
You're absolutely right. And I love the way you put that. That's what they're trying to do, is what they want. And actually, I'm not at all convinced that they're not interested in pushing us back to 1865.
Hey, 1864, if the truth be told, right?
That's right. So,
well, I don't have a problem with Texas seceding from the Union myself. I don't know about y'all.
But we don't want to leave some of those good Black people stuck.
No. We want to keep Austin. Austin can stay. Maybe Houston as well.
Texas. But, you're absolutely right. So the folks who weren't around during Jim Crow don't really understand what that was, right? They don't.
It'll look different. It won't look the way it did
exactly
before. But I mean, it's quite possible that they can find other ways to exploit our minds and our bodies and not, pay us and give us ownership over the things that we produce.
Right.
So I'm not at all convinced that that's not the strategy. To some extent, that's what we are enslaved in the criminal justice system, and they use bodies to make money as guarding us and processing us through the system and all that. I mean, it's quite lucrative, those bodies.
And getting state representation from the prison population that counts towards their representatives.
And branding us with.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and branding us. Once we're arrested and we're in the system, now we're stigmatized. We can't find jobs. We can't get loans. We can't, we can't do the things that average people can do.
So our bodies and our minds are not being used for us. They're being used for other people. Other people who police us, other people who control us, other people who monitor us, other people who, provide inadequate health services to us, all that stuff. Those are people making money. We don't make money on our own bodies. So yeah, it would look different, but there's I think enough similarities that that's the direction they want to go in. And the question is, are we going to just sit there and let them do it, or are we going to fight them back?
Exactly. Well, I'm with you, Ken. I vote for fight.
I got my gloves up in the corner over here.
I vote for fight. I know that's a perfect way to bring another fascinating episode with you to a conclusion. We all have to fight. However we choose to fight, we have to do it, and we have to stand up and protect our communities. So once again, thank you so much for jumping into the breach and spending some time with us.
Thank you, Ken.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me back, and it's always a pleasure. And hopefully I have some area of expertise in the future where I can come back even again, because this is most enjoyable, and I appreciate what you guys are doing. And I just think everybody should see what you guys are, producing here, and, get some of the knowledge that you're putting out over these airways.
Well, we're going to do our best. We're going to keep trying these two old blind, but we're going to keep trying. Because you're right. Knowledge is power. And that's what Nubian Tigers podcast is about. Knowledge is power. So thank you once again. It's just been great.
Thank you.
So Michelle, I got some valuable information from Professor Nunn, because I never really would have looked at this topic from the standpoint of HBCUs and how they would be impacted by this particular decision, and now the problems that they're going to be facing in the coming years since this decision has gone down.
Right. And it also brings attention to the fact that the HBCUs are so underfunded, both by federal and state contribution, as well as by alumni contribution.
Right.
So I know people are thinking, oh, well, the HBCUs can save us if affirmative action doesn't work, but it can't save us if they don't have the capacity to do so. And so
we need to save HBCUs.
Yes, exactly right. So it's an interesting, we're always looking at it from the perspective of the predominantly white schools, and we rarely look at it from the perspective of what impact is that going to have on the HBCU. So he raised a lot of issues for us to think about, I think. If you like what you heard today, please visit our website at www.nubiantigerspodcast.com, where we post all episodes and a resource page with additional information on every podcast subject. You can also find us on YouTube on the Nubian Tigers Podcast channel. Our other social media is on Mastodon, where our handle is @Nubian Tigers Podcast, @blacktwitter.io. Our podcast is hosted by Anchor FM, which is now part of Spotify. But if you have a favorite podcast app, we're probably on it. Look for Nubian Tigers Talk. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge with you next time.
Wake up!